It's a classic political magic trick, hoping to capitalize on the ADD of the American people. President Biden is trying to focus all of his attention, and thus our attention, on everything but his and the country's real problems. Good evening, I'm Leland Vittert. From a chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal with Americans trapped overseas to a confusing COVID surge response to sinking poll numbers, Democrats are already bracing for what The Hill describes as staring down a nightmare in September, a headline that means it's time to shift the narrative and the focus to, well, anything else. Fresh off his holiday weekend vacation in Wilmington, the president and his staff descended on the Northeast today to assess Ida damage in New York and New Jersey nearly a week after the storm hit. Here is his message to those suffering and trying to recover today.
The evidence is clear. Climate change poses an existential threat to our lives, to our economy, and the threat is here. It's not going to get any better.
As always, we are covering all angles. Congressman Darrell Issa is here to discuss the story of one American woman trapped behind enemy lines, desperate to get out, and how he's trying to help her. Pablo Manriquez here to talk about the, quote, cradle to grave tax policies coming from Democrats. But first to Alex Gangitano, White House correspondent for The Hill. She was also traveling with the president this weekend in Wilmington. Alex, appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much. Does the White House realize how big of a problem they have heading into September?
You know, that's a good question, because as you know, the House and the Senate are returning here, this could be a real make or break point for Democrats, especially going into the midterms. You know, if they can align on things like the infrastructure package and the spending package, voting rights, I mean, all the legislative priorities that Democrats have right now. And if they can't, Republicans are really going to try to monopolize on that and push out that narrative going into the midterms. And so September is a pivotal month for the president, and to try to get his party aligned with him. And, you know, so far, it hasn't been a good start, considering that Senator Joe Manchin already has said that Democrats should kind of pump the brakes and pause when it comes to the spending package, the $3.5 trillion package.
Speaking of
that doesn't bode well for the president. He needs everybody on board.
Yeah, you cannot lose a single Democratic senator. Joe Manchin said he's already against it. As you're talking to the White House, have they come up with a plan B, any kind of contingency plans?
So we actually obtained a memo today that the White House sent to House Democrats about the spending bill. And so they're really pushing out messaging and telling House Democrats, you know, here's why the spending bill will do great things for middle-class Americans, and you need to send out this messaging. So I think they're trying to go from all angles here, because of course the clock is ticking, and so I think they're trying a new communication strategy. They're also doing it from the president himself. When he was in New Orleans on Friday, he was talking about how the disaster from the hurricane and climate change is a reason for the spending package to get passed. He said the same kind of things today in New York and New Jersey. So it seems like they are coming at multiple angles here, but I haven't seen any kind of fresh new way to really get the whole Democratic caucus together.
Yeah, we're going to get into it with Pablo, sort of this Democrat versus Democrat fight, the moderates and the progressives. I guess what I'm asking from you, have you heard from the White House, hey, if we can't get the $3.5 trillion through, what's the contingency plan to change the conversation and stop the falling poll numbers?
Yeah, so that's another good question. I mean, if they can't figure out how to actually get this passed, as you mentioned, the poll numbers are not going to look good, and it's going to seem like the president can't get his party all aligned here and be able to whip these votes. And so maybe they would actually take a look at filibuster reform. That's something that the president has pushed back on. He said, his time in the Senate has made it that, he supports the legislative filibuster. But if they can't get the spending bill passed, that could be something that they take a look at next as kind of a plan B.
Alex Gangitano with The Hill, great reporting. I know you were with the president. Come back and share with us as you get more memos, all right?
Definitely. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Meanwhile, also in the nation's capital, Democrats are drafting a bill over the next week that is going to shift the American government towards a social democracy, copying many European nations. From the New York Times, this is their reporting about what it would look like. From cradle to grave, Democrats move to expand social safety net, the $3.5 trillion social policy bill that lawmakers began drafting this week would touch virtually every American at every point in life, from conception to old age. All right, what's in it for you at home? $3.5 trillion, and you get paid leave for new parents, free or affordable childcare. No one pays more than 7% of their income. Universal pre-K programs, expanded child tax credit would expand Mr. Biden's pandemic rescue law, meaning most families would receive income supplements each month. School nutrition programs, high school graduates gets 2 years of higher education, focus on community college, income supplements, workforce training, tax credits for older Americans to offset the cost of elder care, and expand Medicare to cover dental, hearing, and vision services. If this passes, if this happens, does it mean we have fully realized the democratic socialist dream? Here to answer that question, Pablo Manriquez, Washington correspondent for the Latino Rebels, an immigrant from Santiago, Chile, with a political science degree from the University of Notre Dame. Good to see you. Appreciate it as always, Pablo. All right. Is this democratic socialism at work?
Not yet. Obviously, it needs to pass first. We're still in sort of the early stages of this. I think that the artificial deadlines that have been placed on this legislation, that it's going to get done in September, or even that it's going to get done in October, probably incorrect. I mean, there's other stuff that also needs to get done in the Capitol right now, including the debt ceiling, which, as I understand it, needs to be addressed in 10 days after the Senate comes back. So, but yeah, I think overall, I think one of the interesting things, Leland, in terms of like how the president's agenda is beginning to be centered more on progressives than on moderates, came in a scrum the other day with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the famous congresswoman from New York, who was asked by reporters, you know, why about the moderates who were opposing Nancy Pelosi's like sort of push to start the process in the House for the budget reconciliation, this $3.5 trillion. So she said, you know, I don't understand why these moderates are opposing the president's agenda. And it occurred to me in the moment that all of a sudden it's the progressives, it's these squad figures who have really taken over in Congress and are really pushing the agenda now. And all moderates can really do is try and pump the brakes. Because if anything, like Joe Manchin said that, you know, Senator Joe Manchin in the Senate, he said that, you know, he opposes the budget reconciliation, $3.5 trillion price tag.
Right, but in order to push any of this through, the president's got to have political capital. Take a look at his recent approval numbers. President Biden's at an all-time low. 43% right now approved, depending on which poll you look at. 45% is the Real Clear Politics average. Disapproved, 48%. Look, when you're underwater, there's not much leverage you have.
Yeah.
How worried are progressives that
and I think
he
that
can't
Afghanistan
help?
Well, I just think that, like, Afghanistan was such a visible disaster, you know what I mean? That, like, the American people saw it, they're responding to it, and the poll numbers are suggesting, obviously, that he's becoming less popular. I will say this, though. If California is any indication, the California recall election, and some of the polling numbers is going there, progressives are responding to this Texas abortion law. Like, if anything, perhaps in the political sense, Republicans overplayed their hands on that one, because it really is galvanizing Democrats everywhere, especially women voters. So, as you know, Leland, what elected Donald Trump was the creation of new voters, right? So the more these sort of like social issues are able to galvanize young people, are able to get like create voters who wouldn't otherwise vote, you know, that could affect the midterms too. But right now, there's no one I talk to on Capitol Hill, there's no one I talk to in the House or Senate who has any optimism that Democrats are going to be able to keep the House in the midterm. Maybe the president's declining poll numbers are indicative of that too.
Clearly indicative of that, but also you make a good point, though, and that is that if you end up having some new voters come in, polling doesn't necessarily capture those new votings. We learned that certainly in the 2016 election. I want to get you back, though, to Afghanistan, because you made a good point that really across the political spectrum, people said that President Biden really screwed this one up. This is Bernie Goldberg's take. Biden desperately wanted to avoid any images that might be political damaging. So instead of using however many U.S. troops we needed to smooth the way out for our departure, he instead depended on the Taliban to allow safe passage to Americans and our allies who wanted to catch a plane out of the country. Question, how long does the Afghanistan images, as awful as they were, last for Democrats over the next, say, year?
That's a really good question. I was actually just talking to Senator Tammy Duckworth earlier today in the Senate after she presided over a pro forma session, and she said that one of her constituents is actually being held hostage by the Taliban right now. So if these are the kind of things, if Americans are being held hostage by the Taliban, as violence continues to happen over there, I would imagine that over the next year, people are going to continue to talk about what's going on over there. But again, like you mentioned earlier in the segment that with Alex, more and more things are happening, and it's beginning to sort of become this sort of cycle of chaos. So I really don't know. I don't think that anybody knows who exactly voters are going to be focused on when it comes time to vote in the midterm next year.
Yeah.
What are they going to be focused on? Are they going to be more focused on social issues like abortion or foreign policy issues like Afghanistan?
And it depends on who the voter is. As you point out, young progressives focus more on social issues. All right, Pablo, great talking to you as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Leland. Likewise.
All right, Pablo talked about this a little bit. We want to dig in more about the Americans being left behind who want to get out, but they are currently left behind by the Biden administration in Afghanistan. So, is the Taliban beating and hunting Americans or not? People on the ground, as well as a lot of congressional Republicans on the ground, say yes, but the State Department does not seem to agree. One American, mom-to-be from California, here's her picture. Take a look. She's from California. And she says the Taliban is hunting Americans and that she's trapped in Afghanistan.
I think to myself, am I going to make it home? Am I going to end up dying here? What's going to happen? Apparently, they're going door to door from now, trying to see, if anybody has a blue passport.
U.S. Representative Darrell Issa, Republican from California, represents the district Nasiriyah calls home. Congressman, appreciate you being there. Have you been in touch with this young woman? How's she doing since that video was taken?
Well, she's scared and she's in hiding. And I think more importantly, she went not once but twice through this checkpoint maze, stood at the gate and wasn't let in with her husband and her father. She was beaten, kicked in the belly as a pregnant woman. So the trauma that she's felt is enormous. And every day when she says, do we have a way out, I have to tell her to continue to stay where she is until the first of these hostages that are held on planes get out, or until this land route, which is a matter of bribery, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a person. And you might remember that's the one where the State Department took credit after private groups paid the bribes and got a few people out through Tajikistan.
Hey, Congressman, you just said people are being held on planes and being held hostage effectively by the Taliban. The Secretary of State says that's not the case. Take a listen.
We are not aware of anyone being held on an aircraft or any hostage-like situation in Mazar-e-Sharif. So we have to work through the different requirements, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Is he lying?
That is great, Leland. That's great double talk. Work through the requirements means that they were given the manifest and they would not get them cleared with the Taliban. As a result, they're not going where they need to go. Additionally, they're not willing to guarantee third-party countries that are acting as lily pads that they'll get them out of there.
There's always the spin, but you said the word hostage, that people are being held hostage. He said we're not aware of anyone being held on an aircraft or any hostage-like situation. Is he lying?
He's wrong because unless you're willing to bribe, you will, in fact, be beaten or killed if you try to get out of the country. In the few cases they've been able to sort of pre-clear Americans and get them out, we've figured out that basically, yes, the checkpoints can be bribed. Otherwise, the fact is this new government that this administration's working with, they're holding on, and this administration keeps giving us double talk. They've been given manifest, and they have not been able to get them cleared. So you have two choices. Either the Secretary of State isn't doing his job to get it cleared, or the Taliban won't release them. Now, if they won't release them, they are hostages, and that includes aircraft that are already on the ground and aircraft that are waiting to get in, that are sitting in Dubai and other countries.
It seems
we're
like
talking to these individuals.
Yeah, as I listen to you, I can hear the pain in your voice, because there's really nothing you can do for these folks except tell them to wait and try to figure out whether you can pay bribes, and then conceivably you'd have to rely on the U.S., the U.S. military to come through on their promise, the Biden administration through on their promise to get the Taliban to do the right thing. Here's the White House Chief of Staff.
Obviously, we're hopeful that in the coming days, the Qataris will be able to resume air service out of Kabul. And if they do, we're obviously going to look to see if Americans can be part of those flights.
Are we really?
You like the double talk, though, Leland? If then we will work to try to. You know, they said that they had promises. They said that they would continue. The fact is, aircraft can get in and out, but they're not going to get in and out unless they're cleared diplomatically. You don't want to risk getting shot down. But look, the fact is, even the land bridge isn't working because there is no deal. And when manifests are given, you know, every one of these people, we've given proof, you know, their passports,
right,
their pictures of everything. The administration knows exactly who it is. And in some cases, they gave them to the Taliban and in order to be allowed through, and then they didn't take them at the gate.
And then they were beaten.
Imagine what it's like. I had two 80-year-olds who went twice and stood for 7 hours, American citizens, and didn't get through, and they were at the South Gate. And we're in contact with them and knowing that they were left behind. And so now somebody might say that those are not hostages because they're just in hiding. Well, I'm sorry, but Anne Frank wasn't a hostage, but she hid and she survived for much of the war. The fact is, these people in peril of being killed. And until we get them out, we have to assume that their lives are at risk and that any time they go to move, they could be killed. So they're being not held hostage by a prison of walls. They're being held by a country that is a prison.
Congressman, you make some great points, and I know the folks still stuck in Afghanistan are counting on you. Come back and talk to us through the process, all right?
We sure will. Thanks, Leland.
All right. So imagine having to send a photo to the government to prove you're in your own home during quarantine. Sounds like a book, right? Well, it's not a book. It's happening in one country. We're going to look at whether the United States could be next. Plus, why a new poll is fueling speculation that former President Trump is going to run again in 2024. And we're going to tell you the one issue that the president sees President Biden as the most vulnerable on. We'll be right back.
Afghanistan cannot be used as a terrorist base.
That Afghanistan has become a Disneyland for terrorists.
We plan for every contingency.
Total chaos.
It is heartbreaking. It is depressing. It's a failure, and he needs to own that failure.
I bear responsibility for all that's happened.
He did not admit any mistakes. He did not offer any change of course. He says we're going to continue forward.
He really isn't taking responsibility.
All right, so what you just watched was about 20 seconds of an ad from President Trump's Political Action Committee. It's called Surrender in Chief. That's what they titled the ad, obviously trying to capitalize on President Biden's botched Afghanistan withdrawal. And take a look at this new poll. It shows a hypothetical rematch of 2024 between the two would have Mr. Trump edging out the current president. This is an Emerson College poll. 47% would vote for the former president, 46% would vote for Mr. Biden. President Trump's probably paying attention to polls like that, based on this headline today in Politico reading, Trump builds turnkey campaign operation for 2024. The former president is signaling a heightened interest in a rematch with Joe Biden and laying the necessary groundwork. Joining us now is one of the authors of the piece, Politico writer Meredith McGraw. Meredith, appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. So is this meaningful groundwork or just sort of perfunctory in case President Trump wants to run?
Well, what we're seeing really is a groundswell of building up by former President Trump and his team. We're still 3 years ahead of 2024, but he's planning rallies in places like Iowa. There's a Georgia rally in the works, a potential rally in Florida, critical swing states. He's hired people to work in those states. The former president has been holding fundraisers. He's been making a slew of endorsements for races across the country. And he really is thinking about running again in 2024. Of course, there's been a lot of speculation about whether or not he will actually get in the race. And there are Republicans that are waiting on the sidelines, people like former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the former Vice President Mike Pence, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, among others who are interested, but he really has the field frozen until he actually jumps in.
It's a great point.
He's going to run, and right now, yeah.
You look at Pompeo's Instagram these days. He's living in Iowa and New Hampshire. Right. You getting a sense from any of these other Republicans in their camps that they're a little annoyed about this maybe not thing?
Well, it makes it awfully hard for them to craft their messaging. If they want to get out there ahead of Trump and make the case that they would be a front runner come 2024, they have to sort of tiptoe around Trump's policies. Of course, some of them worked in his administration, but we've seen that play out in how they've responded to what happened in Afghanistan. Nikki Haley had some critical words about the Biden administration dealing with the Taliban, but then people quickly jumped on it and reminded her that the Trump administration, they dealt with the Taliban, of course, with their deal for Afghanistan. So it's made the messaging around whether or not Trump gets in really tricky for these people, because they want to show that they support Trump. Trump is still, in many ways, the leader of the party, but they also want to make their own mark right now.
Hard to imagine a way in which President Trump is not the leader of the Republican Party, like it or not, good for the party or not. We want to put those poll numbers back up because you made a couple of references to them, 47, 46. We looked back in the entire 2020 race. President Trump never led then-candidate Joe Biden in the Real Clear Politics average. How much do we read into this poll that you've got this debacle and embarrassment in Afghanistan and President Trump was seen as tough on foreign policy, whether it was or not, make your own decision, but how much of this was a blip and how much of this do the Trump people think they can really capitalize on?
Well, Trump's advisors think that there is blood in the water right now, and you can certainly tell that from how Trump himself is responding to what really has been a challenging month for President Biden, from this fourth wave of the pandemic to his handling of Afghanistan. And, as they try to shift the attention to domestic politics, they're being held back by all of these other things. And Trump certainly sees that. And that's made clear in that ad that you just played that focuses on Biden's leadership during Afghanistan and these other issues.
Yeah. Blood in the water is the way you summed it up. It's an excellent way to end. Meredith, thank you. We'll have you back as your reporting continues.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Doesn't matter whether they are Democrats or Republicans. Hard to imagine me saying that, but truly it doesn't. Political operatives on both sides say the 2024 election, for that matter, the 2022 election, might be decided long before the election. They argue who gets to vote and how they will vote changes America forever. The Texas governor just signed a law changing both of those things. News Nation's Marky Martin is in Texas tonight with the fight that is about to come from this bill. Good evening, Marky.
Yeah, good evening, Leland. I want to start out with the White House. President Biden has repeatedly called these kinds of efforts un-American. And today aboard Air Force One, you had White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying that she and the administration stand behind all of these voting rights groups and advocates who are suing over Senate Bill 1, who were fighting it. And she said the White House has much work to do, although that was vague. She didn't really lay out a specific plan, only saying that Vice President Harris has been tapped to be at the helm of that fight. Now, Leland, let me really break down what Senate Bill 1 entails. First and foremost, it bans drive-through voting. Secondly, it eliminates 24-hour early voting. Thirdly, it then makes it a felony for any local voting officials to send out unsolicited mail-in ballot applications. And lastly, it really gives those partisan poll watchers more autonomy, right? Specifically, they're now able to move around freely as they see fit. And you have a lot of Dems who are angry over this and people who are just against it in general, saying that it really erects challenging hurdles that makes it tougher for Texans to cast their ballot. But today, Governor Abbott stood behind his decision to sign it. Take a listen.
The Texas law, it does make it easier than ever before for anybody to go cast a ballot. It does also, however, make sure that it is harder for people to cheat at the ballot box in Texas.
Now, as you can imagine, Democrats vehemently disagree over this, and we actually talked to 2 Texas Democratic representatives this afternoon. Here's what they had to say.
At the end of the day, this was just a partisan bill for Governor Abbott to align himself with Donald Trump.
Make no mistake about it, this is not going to stop any fraud. What this bill is about is stopping voters from voting.
And Leland, as you can imagine, this is already facing intense legal backlash with at least 5 lawsuits being challenged in state and federal courts. More expected to come. Leland.
Yeah, and more discussion about these laws around the country and other states. Markey, thank you very much. All right. Why critics now say new documents prove Dr. Anthony Fauci lied about whether the U.S. was funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab in China. Plus, Democrats going all in to try and save California. Governor Gavin Newsom's job is on the line. We'll talk about the recall election. Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker is the first governor in U.S. history to have won a recall election. He'll tell us what advice he might have for Newsom when we come back. President Biden's going to campaign for embattled California Governor Gavin Newsom next week ahead of a recall election. Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be there tomorrow. Senator Elizabeth Warren joined Newsom at a rally over the weekend. It shows you just how seriously Democrats are taking the possibility that Newsom is going to be recalled and is in real trouble. But more importantly, why is Deep Blue California even a focus for the White House this week? Someone who knows a lot about recall elections, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, Republican, who won his recall election back in 2012, the first governor in U.S. history to do so. Walker writing in a Washington Times op-ed, quote, "Things are bad in California and seem to be getting worse for Governor Newsom." Former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker joins us now, president of the Young Americans Foundation. Good to see you. Appreciate it, sir. All right. You survived. You won a recall. What advice do you have for Gavin Newsom?
Don't go to the French Laundry. I think more than anything,
I thought you might go there.
Well, the kicker is whether you're Republican or Democrat, the biggest Achilles heel anyone has in politics, particularly in a race like this, is hypocrisy. They're not even enough Republicans to even come close to winning this recall election. For Gavin Newsom to lose, he's got to lose big, not only amongst Republicans, independents, but even some discerning Democrats. And hypocrisy is the one thing that can really drive that point home. People feel like, hey, he said he was going to do one thing, and he did something different. It's
interesting you say
those are the things that get people worked up. Yeah.
Based on the way you broke down the electorate, great analysis. But about 6 or 8 weeks ago, it was within 2 points in certain polls of him getting recalled. We'll get to who would replace him in a minute. But now we look at the recall election, different than your recall election because you faced an individual candidate. We'll put up the Real Clear Politics average here. It's now widened almost to 8 points. Spread, no, do not remove, 8.6%. He's widening the spread, and you say he's still in trouble. Why?
Well, I think if you look at the specifics, you look at a state that has #1 in the nation for homeless population. In fact, about almost a quarter of all the homeless people in the entire country live in California. The second worst, they're tied for the second worst unemployment numbers. You see fires, mudslides, all sorts of disasters, real economic problems. But I think the bigger issue is the fact that there's been this inconsistency between businesses, churches, schools being open and closed and open and closed. At some point, people just get frustrated with that.
I get the problems you're talking about, and there's zillions of people leaving California for all the reasons you just pointed out. But the poll numbers are the poll numbers, and he's got an 8.6% spread.
Well, clearly what they've done in the last few weeks is tried to make this about Republicans and about Donald Trump, which is interesting because I still think there's a shot. It's a huge advantage for Democrats over Republicans there. But for Newsom and his allies to blame Republicans on this when the media there for years has been telling them the Republican Party is almost non-existent, for them to say that Donald Trump is responsible for this when it was almost a 2-to-1 margin for Biden in that state, I think really underestimates the fact that there are people upset, including a lot of Democrats, who just had it with Gavin Newsom and his hypocrisy.
Fair enough about making a referendum. And the video proves that, because if you look at a lot of the clips of Gavin Newsom out there, it says stop the Republican recall is how they're branding it. Larry Elder, though, is not perhaps helping the situation, you might say. No. He is the leader now, the #1 candidate, a Republican who, shall we say, has some unusual views. This clip now from 2019 is being tossed around again. Take a listen.
When people talk about reparations, do they really want to have that conversation? Because, like it or not, slavery was legal. And so their property, their legal property, was taken away from them after the Civil War. So you can make an argument that the people that are owed reparations, and not only just black people, but also the people whose, quote, property, close quote, was taken away.
Boy, what a gift to Gavin Newsom.
Well, they're going to keep coming up with things like this, whether they're real clips or they're insinuations along the way. You heard Elizabeth Warren make a few of those accusations as well over the weekend. The end, though, is I still think, unlike the recall election I had, where, as you mentioned, it was head-to-head, the fact that voters can still say no and then have a pick, particularly in a state where no matter what happens in this election, Democrats will still hold a mega supermajority in the state house. So this idea that somehow one Republican or one Libertarian winning a recall election will suddenly make the difference. Just look back to when Arnold Schwarzenegger was in. He didn't get much of anything done. It certainly would shake things up in politics for the moment, but it would not dramatically change the policies that come out of Sacramento.
Wouldn't change the policies out of Sacramento, but that governor would be able to appoint a U.S. senator, wouldn't they, if something happened to Dianne Feinstein?
Yeah, and that's one of the points they're going to make, although I think that's a little bit morbid. My guess is, age-wise, she's right up there with a good number of other members of the United States Senate. Fair. They'll probably serve out her term along the way, but they're going to use everything and anything to try and initiate this. With Biden and Harris coming in, I don't know, in some ways, the fact that there even is a recall, let alone a close race, shows you just how disliked Gavin Newsom is. And even if he comes out winning, unless he wins by 20 points, this is going to be a net negative for him.
Well, fair enough. And the fact that the president and vice president are flying all the way to California does show you that Democrats may have some internal polling, some turnout data that says things are a little tighter. Governor Walker, it's always great to see you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah, pleasure's ours. All right, we've been talking about this growing pushback against COVID mandates, not only in our own country, but across the globe. Protesters, this video right here, storming into a shopping center in France, refusing to show proof of vaccination while chanting freedom. This is tens of thousands of French citizens took to the street for an 8th straight weekend, protesting a mandatory health pass that's required to get into public places. There's backlash building from our neighbors to the north over newly instituted COVID rules in parts of Canada. You can see the overhead view of that video. Thousands taking to the streets in Montreal to protest mandates there, including vaccine passports, which started this month. Everyone is now required to show government-issued proof they got the vaccine to be allowed into, here's the list, businesses, restaurants, gyms, and festivals. That brings us to Australia, which is taking their COVID restrictions to an unprecedented level. One of Australia's states is debuting an app which sounds like something out of 1984. Our worst nightmare. It uses facial recognition to enforce quarantine rules. When the app pings you, you have to prove you are home by showing your face, letting the app then access the location data on your phone. If you can't be verified with facial shape analysis and recognition software, police will be dispatched to do an in-person check-in. For now, it is voluntary. But you don't have to imagine that it could become involuntary. There's a lot of obvious concerns about civil liberties and where this is headed. To figure out where it is headed, bring in someone who knows Australian well. Evan Mulholland worked for state and federal parliamentarians there, Director of Communications for the Institute of Public Affairs. Evan, appreciate you being with us. Do we have all those restrictions right in Australia? This isn't like a joke that Snopes is going to say is false, right? All right, we see Evan's mouth moving, but we don't actually hear him. We might be getting him back. Number of the other restrictions there. Oh,
can you hear me now?
Yes, Evan, we can. All right. All these restrictions are actually happening, right? It's not like a joke or Snopes.
Absolutely. And I would say it's even worse. So here in Melbourne, where I am, there is a 9 p.m. curfew. You can't go outside. you'll get a fine of $3,000 if you do. If you went outside as well without a mask, you'd get a fine of $3,000 US. So absolutely, the restrictions are correct. There's infringements on civil liberties that are beyond sort of comprehension for people in the US. And these kind of things don't happen in a vacuum. It's when, you know, the political and cultural elite take freedoms away slowly. And that's kind of what's happened in Australia. Australia seems to be obsessed with getting to zero cases. That is no longer possible in some states due to the Delta
variant. Why the obsession? Why is the government leadership in Australia so terrified of even a couple of COVID cases?
Well, the goalposts keep moving. At the start of the pandemic, we were told we've got 2 weeks to flatten the curve and then we can suppress the virus. And then it was simply putting people into lockdown for a handful of cases so we could get back to 0 cases and then have our freedoms back. And continually the goalposts are moving. Now it's we have to get to 80% double dose vaccination and then we can have our freedoms back. So once these governments and state governments in particular that have all the power get hold of power, it's very hard for them to give that up. And we've seen draconian rules
I'm interested,
around.
Evan, we're seeing these videos of protests in France. We've seen some of them get violent. We've seen protests in the United States, not really violent ones, with the huge crowds in Canada that we're showing you. Have people in Australia revolted, or are you all just doing whatever the government says?
There are lots of protests, and there were protests recently here in Victoria. About 5,000 people attended, and the police shot pepper bullets into people's backs. There were kids crying because they had pepper in their eyes. And it was very much a peaceful protest, but the police then claimed the majority of them came with violence in mind. Absolutely outrageous thing to say. Peaceful protest is a normal thing, and it's not just protest. Last year, during Victoria's long lockdown, a pregnant mother put up a Facebook post, just a Facebook post about an event, about a protest where there were 0 cases in a regional community, and police barged into her home and handcuffed her in front of her children.
Wow.
For simply posting a Facebook post. This is how far things have gone.
Arrested for a Facebook post. Says a lot. Evan, thank you. Come back and talk to us as technology and lockdowns allow. Thank you. This is pretty scary. The Chinese military seems to have a new toy, a hypersonic drone, but it's likely not the only new weapon they have. Why the rapid expansion of Chinese military might is something that should scare all of us. China is advancing by leaps and bounds when it comes to hypersonic technology. If those words scare you, it should. If you have no idea what it means, we're going to explain, and then it's going to scare you. China's Air Force says they may have figured out how to land a hypersonic drone. This reporting comes from the South China Morning Press. Take a look. This drone actually can fly 5 times faster than the speed of sound, but China's military, according to the South China Morning Times, had a problem landing it safely on an airstrip. They now say that they're refiguring out the software, and it may solve the problem. May not sound like much, but it just goes to show what China is testing and where their technology is at, which reportedly is way ahead of the United States. Joining us now to talk more about the scary situation, Dr. Rebecca Grant. She studied these things for years while working for the United States Air Force and now joins us. Dr. Grant, thank you. What is hypersonic technology, and why are the Chinese better at it than we are?
Hypersonics is going really fast, so probably about 4,000 miles an hour. And I'm not ready to say China is better at it. We're a little bit ahead, but we're not far enough ahead. And what we see with this nasty little drone is that China's working really hard to perfect hypersonic technology.
And if they perfect it, it allows them to do what to us?
Well, this drone is a reconnaissance drone, and it means that they can launch this. It can pop up anywhere over the Pacific, and its purpose is to target our U.S. forces, Navy ships, other forces like that. Other applications of hypersonic technology, weapons. So imagine a weapon coming in at 4,000 miles an hour, or in this case, the reconnaissance drone is just hard to track and see and shoot down. So it can give them a real advantage and also compensate if they lose their space-based targeting capability. This is one nasty little drone.
So you said you're not convinced that China really is ahead of the United States. We've always known that there's new weapon systems that are developed and sometimes even operational for 10 years. Then all of a sudden, oh, gee, the B-2 stealth bomber shows up on everybody's television screens. Is there a chance that we have this and the rest of the public just doesn't know about it?
Well, we are working very hard on hypersonic technology, investing $3 billion this year alone. But what we see with China is, yes, they've made a lot of progress. They are working very hard and testing. But this particular report, where they're bragging about improving their flight control software, tells me that they still have some issues. We also think this is just a rocket-powered drone, so they have not solved the full problem of hypersonic engine technology. But we are only a little bit ahead. And remember, the Russians also have some deployed hypersonic weapons. This hypersonic arms race, this is really the challenge of the moment in keeping U.S. military capabilities ahead.
You know, China's always said they just want a peaceful coexistence. They just want to live in their sphere. It feels like this kind of, yeah, okay, your reaction says everything it needs to. The question would be, is there anything we can do at this point? Because they've stolen so much technology from us. They've continued to move ahead with all of their research. What else do they have?
They have stolen a lot, but we are working really hard on this. Several companies are testing hypersonic vehicles, both the air-breathing and the ones that are launched from bombers. The Australians are working on it, the British as well. So we need for the Pentagon to really work hard and keep the funding steady for this investment. And you know what? We need to see China for what it is. They're trying to take over their half of the Pacific. We have to not let them do that. And we have to understand that we can't just be all climate change and diplomacy. They really want military domination. Make no mistake about it.
If they are able to deploy this weapon over the Pacific, even specifically the Pacific, do they deny the U.S. Navy the ability to operate there?
The Navy would say no, but it makes it tougher because they could use a reconnaissance drone like this to find where our carrier strike groups and other forces are. And it just makes it that much harder. And what they want to do, China wants to do, is to kind of create a bubble and make the U.S. Navy and our allies afraid to go into that zone. Now, the U.S. Navy will not let that happen. But no question, this makes it much more dangerous as this improves their targeting and ultimately it improves their strike capabilities.
And it also helps them on the world stage to scare everybody. Dr. Grant, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right. A new take on the five-finger discount when we come back.